Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this evening's U.S. Senate debate at the historic Guard Art Center in New London. I'm Ann Nyberg, moderator for News 8. News 8 and the Day of New London are sponsoring this event in cooperation with the League of Women Voters. Taking part are Democrat Richard Blumenthal and Republican Linda McMahon. Questioning the candidates this evening are News 8's political correspondent, Mark Davis, and editorial page editor for the day, Paul Chenier. This debate will be cumulative. There will be 24 minutes on the clock for each candidate. Each candidate, the answer will be no more than 3 minutes. At the end of the debate, there will be 2 minutes for each candidate to make a closing statement. To the audience, we are televising, streaming live. You should remain seated, refrain from any applause, cell phones off. Thank you in advance for giving these candidates the respect they deserve. And now let us begin this debate. The questioning will start with Paul Chenier. The first to answer will be Mr. Blumenthal. Paul.
Good evening. I'm going to start this off with an excerpt from the Republicans' recently released Pledge to America, and I think it well summarizes the Republican perspective on why we have persistent high unemployment, and I'd like to get your reaction to this quote from the Pledge to America. The quote is, "It is time to end this liberal Keynesian experiment and stop the attacks on our employers that prevent them from investing in our economy. We need private sector jobs, not more government." And I'd like to get your reaction to that, Mr. Blumenthal.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Thank you, Ann, and to everyone who's watching. The fact of the matter is that our state and our nation are struggling with high unemployment, unacceptably high unemployment, and with an approach from Washington that emphasizes too much top-down bailouts that help Wall Street and investment banks there, and not enough for Main Street, where jobs are created. People create jobs. Small businesses create jobs. Government can provide the tools, but it also must take away the obstacles. And there are some very specific ways that I think government can provide the tools. For example, aid for exports, a more acceptable and stronger way to provide financing and loans for businesses. We can do better in job training, and also taking away some of the obstacles like providing tax deductions for businesses with startup costs, as well as research and development credits for businesses that manufacture here, and tax exemptions for new hires, as well as exemptions for capital gains. That kind of program, along with closing the loopholes for corporations that send jobs overseas, which cost us $200 billion, are what I would fight to do. And my opponent has a very different approach. She supported the bailout. I opposed it because it does too much for those investment banks, not enough to aid those small businesses, which really create jobs. I believe that this country can and should do better for those small businesses, as well as for people who are struggling. For example, I would not look at changing the minimum wage. My opponent was asked that question, and she said she would look at changing and cutting the minimum wage. So this country must do better at job creation, but people and small businesses create jobs, and government can provide the tools and remove the obstacles.
Linda, Ms. McMahon.
I would also like to thank all of you who are this evening, our hosts, our panelists, and those here in the audience and watching us electronically at home. I must say, Mr. Blumenthal, I'm very happy you have a better notion of how to create jobs this week than you had last week. And you were right. The government does not create jobs. People create jobs. Entrepreneurs take risks. And in order for them to take risks, they have to have an environment that has the ability for them to know that when they take those risks, it's an environment of certainty. They know how to plan. They know what taxes are going to be levied on them. They know what regulations are going to be levied on them. And until we create that environment of certainty for entrepreneurs, we're not going to be able to create jobs. And that's what we really have to focus on, is creating jobs in the private sector. Now, Mr. Blumenthal likes to keep referring to the fact that he says that I talked about lowering the minimum wage. But I would just advise you to take a look at the New York Times or the Hartford Courant or the Connecticut Mirror, which says absolutely I did not say that, though he would like to continue to bring that up. Mr. Blumenthal really has no experience in creating jobs in the private sector. So he doesn't really understand what it's like when he talks about loopholes for companies that have jobs overseas. What loopholes translates to, ladies and gentlemen, is tax increases. Companies that have jobs outside of the United States or have companies outside of the United States are paying the corporate tax rate here in America when the funds are brought back into the United States. But they also pay the tax that is in that country where the business is located. So there's no incentive for companies here. One of the tax increases that might occur is for companies to be taxed from $1, the day they earn those dollars, instead of when they bring them back to the United States. That is not going to encourage job growth here. In fact, it will drive jobs out of this country. Businesses won't be located here. The United States won't have any of that income or any of that revenue. Mr. Blumenthal's entire career has been in government, so he doesn't understand about creating jobs. And I would just ask him, Mr. Blumenthal, have you created any jobs in our country?
All right, Mark, your question to Ms. McMahon.
Mrs. McMahon, I was at the event in East Hartford where the minimum wage was discussed, and I agree you did not say you wanted to cut the minimum wage. However, a lot of people are unclear about exactly what you did say, as is referenced by all of my emails and voicemails ever since that event had happened. So could you please tell us exactly what your position is on the minimum wage? Do you support the federal government's authority to have one, or do you think it is a hindrance to small business?
Well, Mark, as I said that day, I absolutely do not believe that we should cut the minimum wage. I have said that we should look, in fact, Mr. Blumenthal and I both have the same opinion on this, that before the minimum wage is increased, I think we should review it, and I think that's a prudent position for any senator or any legislator to take. So just to make sure that I don't think in today's economy, clearly we should not be talking about increasing taxes on anyone. We're certainly not going to talk about reducing minimum wage. I believe that we should look at making sure that we keep taxes where they are for everyone in a time when we have unemployment that's at 9.6% in our nation and 9.1% in our state. Raising taxes on any segment, especially on small businesses that are going to create 70% of the jobs in this country, is not the right thing to do. And my opponent would want to raise taxes on small businesses and send over $12.5 billion to Washington. I want to keep that money here in our state and in the hands of our families and in the hands of companies who are going to create those jobs and not send it to Washington. So Mr. Blumenthal and I have a very different opinion on raising taxes. He wants to raise taxes on small businesses, just like he raised taxes when he was in the legislature for 6 years in Connecticut, which you might not know, before he was Attorney General. During that time, he voted for the largest increase in taxes in the state's history at that particular time, over $850 million. And during his 6 years, which is the length of time he would serve as a senator, he voted to almost double spending in the state of Connecticut. We cannot send more tax and spending government, lifelong politicians to Washington. We just can't afford it.
Mr. Blumenthal.
Thank you. I might say my opponent would have more credibility on the issue of taxes if she had not taken a tax credit last year to create jobs and then laid off 10% of her workforce and taken home $46 million. And she would have more credibility on the issue of outsourcing if her company did not buy most of its merchandise manufactured in China and Pakistan abroad, and if her own campaign hats and T-shirts were not manufactured abroad. I'm not surprised that she is against closing that loophole that costs us $200 billion and encourages businesses to send jobs overseas. But I can tell the people of Connecticut that I will stand strong against it. I will fight it, just as I would all of the special giveaways to the pharmaceutical drug companies, to agribusiness, to the energy interests that cost us money and balloon our debt. And in fact, my opponent's tax proposal would balloon our debt by $700 billion. Incredible. $700 billion, and holding middle-class tax cuts hostage so the wealthiest 2% can receive that tax cut that would balloon our deficit by $700 billion over 10 years, with the excuse that somehow it's good for small business. Absolutely not. And the reason I say it is that only a small fraction of small businesses would be affected by extending those tax cuts to the wealthiest 2%. In fact, the average small business has income of about $40,000, well below the cutoff that I believe should be applied. A middle-class tax cut should be given now. I'm disappointed the Congress returned home without voting on it, but I would vote on it. My opponent would hold it hostage for the wealthiest 2% to receive their tax cuts. And it is absolutely right that small businesses create jobs, people create jobs, and consumer demand would be stimulated by that middle tax cut and enable more of our people to go back to work, lower that 9.6 unemployment rate, 9.1% in Connecticut, and put thousands of people back to work. That's what we need to do. That's what I would fight to do. The people of Connecticut know that I have fought for them, stood strong for them. My opponent has put profits ahead of people, as she did when she took that tax credit and then laid off her workforce.
All right, Mark, your question for Mr. Blumenthal.
And you support the minimum wage, right?
I firmly support the minimum wage. I would not cut it. And if I were asked that question, I would not say I'd look at cutting it, which is what she did. It's on the video.
All right, just so that you would answer the question, because I get a lot of emails from people to make you both answer the questions. Mr. Blumenthal, there was a huge piece in the Sunday Times from an economics professor at Harvard who said he has an adjusted gross income in excess of $250,000 and can't afford to pay the extra tax, but that it will discourage him from doing any extra work or hiring anyone because the taxation will be so high over that level that it wouldn't be worth it. He's looking towards perhaps saving it for his children, whereas if he was to do a special job for $1,000 now, he might be able to invest almost $1,000 for his children, but under your proposal and President Obama's, he might end up only taking home $500.
Well, let's be very clear. I am supporting cutting taxes or extending the tax cuts for the middle class, which I believe is necessary not only for the sake of fairness, but also because it would help stimulate our economy. For people and families that earn more than $250,000, the rates would simply be at the Clinton levels of taxation. Let's remember, under President Clinton, our economy did quite well, and people earning more than that amount did quite well. And I believe strongly that we should have tax cuts now. I'm the only candidate here who is in favor of immediate tax cuts. And by the way, the only candidate who has taken a position that we should not cut Social Security, we should not establish a means test or raise the eligibility age levels. We should not do anything to cut Social Security, which is not only a promise we've made to seniors, but also absolutely important to our economic recovery and revival. My opponent says not appropriate for the campaign trail to talk about Social Security.
Ms. McMahon.
Mr. Blumenthal and I absolutely agree that taxes should not be raised on middle-income families. There's no dispute between him and me There is no dispute between Democrats and Republicans. The issue is whether or not we would raise taxes on small businesses. And while he might negate the fact that there would be not many, maybe small businesses affected, 72% of the revenue earned by small businesses fall into that class that he's talking about. Why on earth would we consider raising taxes on any group? Clearly not on middle-income families, but also not on anyone. Let's encourage and incentivize businesses to grow. Let's don't penalize them. Middle-class families certainly aren't going to be able to go out and buy things if they don't have a job. Let's create jobs. Mr. Blumenthal, that's what you continue to fail to understand, is that we just need to create jobs in this country, not raise taxes, leave the money in the hands of small businesses, and let the free market, free enterprise system work as it has so well throughout our history. And I just would like to take issue with a couple of things Mr. Blumenthal has said, and that is talking about tax incentives. Now, just before in his comment, when he was talking about creating jobs, he was talking about giving tax incentives. Well, I'm very happy that WWE was able to take tax incentives for investments made. Investments made in a digital media department, in television production. So yes, tax incentives help grow, did help create jobs. Also, as a CEO, you make tough decisions sometimes and you move on. A strong, healthy company is one that is going to continue to grow. I'm proud of the fact that WWE has created an average of 20 jobs a year over the last 28 years. And because it is a strong company, it's going to move forward with a new initiative next year, a new network, and will probably add 100 to 140 new employees. And Mr. Blumenthal, you might just not understand this, but until you have profits, you can't hire more people. You can't grow your company. You can't move it forward. So I'm proud of the fact that WWE has moved forward. And let's make sure that on our campaign trail, as we discuss our entitlement programs, that we are clear that our entitlements, our Medicare and Social Security, do need to be strengthened. They are headed for insolvency if they are not. But I find that it's inappropriate on the campaign trail to kick it around like a political football, because any candidate before who's touched that third rail takes away the opportunity of getting into the legislature in a totally bipartisan way and put good ideas on the table to talk about how to strengthen these programs.
Thank you, Mrs. McMahon. Paul, your question for Mrs. McMahon.
I'd like to continue the discussion on tax and spend, which seems to be a big issue in the campaign, certainly in the economy. Mrs. McMahon, you've called for a balanced budget amendment. You want to make the Bush tax cuts permanent, and the Treasury calculates that will cost $3.7 trillion over 10 years, and yet you don't want to talk about how we control spending on entitlements, Social Security, and Medicare. So don't the voters deserve some information on how you propose getting spending under control?
I certainly have offered some ideas about getting our spending under control, and I think that's important, because one of the issues I have talked about is balancing our budget. I mean, we can't operate businesses, we can't operate our households if we spend more than we're bringing in, and it's common sense. So how do we do that in Washington? One of the first things I talked about was rolling back non-defense discretionary spending to 2008 levels, capping federal hiring, having a freeze on wage increases at the federal government level, and also taking our unspent stimulus money and paying down our debt. We are paying about $1 billion a day in debt service. That would go a long way toward reducing our deficit. And if we put the measures in place that I've just talked about, we'd have an opportunity to decrease our deficit of about $1.3 trillion over the next few years. That's a move definitely in the right direction. We cannot keep spending more than we're making. And when I'm talking about letting the current tax law continue so that small businesses do have an incentive to create jobs and put people back to work, that'll have a multiplier effect on the economy. Because as businesses create jobs, more people buy more goods and services and pay more taxes. And that's also common sense. My opponent, however, would like you to think that just raising taxes on this next level, as he calls it, just, as he's going to keep taxes in place the way they are on middle income families, not allow those taxes to increase. And what I'm saying is middle income families need jobs. So let's create jobs. And I don't think that we want to have more policies like Mr. Blumenthal had recommended or as he voted on when he was in the legislature in Connecticut. He absolutely has a record of tax and spend. He voted with the Democratic Party 99% of the time. We don't want a rubber stamp in Washington to continue to follow through on the same policies. Let's make sure that we have common sense returned to Washington.
Mr. Blumenthal.
Yes, thank you. I'm the only candidate here who favors an immediate tax cut for the middle class, and I'm the only candidate who's outlining specific proposals to help provide small business with the tools it needs to hire more people. Remember, small business creates more than 70% of the jobs in the country, and the only candidate who is providing specific proposals to remove some of the obstacles, tax deductions, tax credits, more aid in borrowing. As I go around the state of Connecticut, small businesses tell me they can't get loans because the banks aren't making those loans. Government can provide that kind of support through direct loans from the SBA and groups of banks, consortia of banks that can get together and make those loans. These specific proposals and closing the loopholes that encourage and reward companies for sending those jobs overseas and cost us as taxpayers are specific measures. In addition, we need a Buy America program that returns Connecticut to making things again in the way that we used to do. Buy America means using federal tax dollars to buy American goods, not the ones made overseas. And we know from our experience with Ansonia Copper and Brass that Electric Boat bought many essential parts overseas. We can do more to encourage Buy America and Made in America. I defended the Made in America label. I go to bat for small businesses when they are trampled. I stood up for Alderman Motors when it was about to be closed and would have lost many jobs when GM threatened to close it. And we won that battle with Kathy Platt. I stood up for the workers at Pratt & Whitney when their jobs were going to be sent out of state and overseas. I stood up for Stanley Works when it was threatened by a hostile takeover. Standing up for Connecticut businesses and ordinary people is what I want to do. I have a record of fighting for Connecticut and its people, and small businesses do need tax relief, but it should be targeted, not the kind of trickle-down economics that created this mess and put millions of people out of work. Wall Street needs to be reformed. My opponent opposed it. I supported it. And I support targeted tax cuts for small business.
Paul, your question for Mr. Blumenthal.
You were just mentioning Buy America, and you've called for Treasury Secretary Geithner to take swift action against China for currency manipulation. First, are you talking about tariffs? And aren't you concerned that this could set off a protectionist trade war that ends up costing more jobs?
I believe strongly that Chinese currency manipulation must stop and that this country must pursue fairer trade policies. And I can commit that I would fight as hard to make those trade policies fairer as I have done when I fought utilities in raising their rates, pharmaceutical drug companies in overcharging our taxpayers, big tobacco when it addicted our children, again and again and again. And I have asked the Secretary of the Treasury to declare China a currency manipulator and impose the sanctions that are necessary to change the way it values its currency. Undervaluing its currency means that barriers are created to our exports to China. And I know the impact not just from economic theory or from experts, but going around to businesses here in the state of Connecticut, listening to how their exports are stopped by the Chinese undervaluation of its currency. I am not fearful of a protectionist war because the rest of the world should be on our side. And in fact, the head of the IMF recently urged that China reconsider its trade policies. I think on so many issues, we must take the lead, and I would urge, as I have done before, the President of the United States to act firmly, forthrightly, promptly to end Chinese currency manipulation.
All right, Mrs. Blumenthal. I'm sorry, Mrs. McMahon. That was a great look. I had a producer talking to me at the same time.
Mrs. Blumenthal is with us tonight.
Mrs. Blumenthal. Mrs. McMahon.
I think we absolutely have to make sure that we have fair trade agreements in place, because our markets here in the United States, our manufacturers here need markets outside of our country. In fact, President Obama said that if we increase exports by 1%, we will add about 250,000 jobs. We have fair trade agreements pending, right now in Congress that were negotiated in 2007 in Colombia and Panama and South Korea. Last week, the EU went forward with its fair trade agreement with South Korea, and they're going to get a jump on that market. We still have time. We could still do it. But we have to make sure that we have those markets for our goods to be exported. The United States is still the leading manufacturing company in the world. And over the past few years, we've increased, our exports to China over 300%. So we want to make sure that we do have fair trade agreements in place so that we have markets for the goods that we are manufacturing. But at the same time, I think that the way that we're going to create jobs here in our country and help balance our economy and get it back on track is to make sure that our taxes here in this country on corporations are fair, that they compete on a global marketplace. The average corporate tax rate around the world is 18%. Here in the United States, it's 35%. Our energy costs are higher. Our labor costs are higher. We are not creating the right environment here to manufacture those goods. So until we create the environment here to grow our businesses and to strengthen our economy, we're not going to have that same kind of balance because we're not going to have the products to export. And we have to have the markets to export them to. I agree that we should have a currency in China that does fluctuate better than it is now. It's been tied to U.S. currency, I think, for too long. About 60 other countries tie their currency to the United States as well. In order to create this balance of trade, the clear indication is we import way many more products and buy more products than the Chinese do. So I do think we need to create those markets, making sure that we don't have protectionist policies in place, because that is just not the way to grow our economy. Let's incentivize our businesses here, but let's make sure that our trade agreements, are in place. Mr. Blumenthal, I just would like to ask you one question, too. When you talk about jobs that are overseas and companies who outsource, in fact, I believe you have invested holdings in companies that operate in China and in India, and just prior to getting into this election, you divested yourself of holdings that you had in companies that were in the Cayman Islands.
I can tell you whatever investments I have overseas pale in comparison to the example that you set by outsourcing, in effect outsourcing jobs, by buying merchandise overseas through WWE. And I will just add that this issue is much broader than just the two candidates here. We're talking about the future of our economy and our democracy. We need to stand strong for fairer trade policies. We need to fight currency manipulation by China that disadvantages our manufacturers here. And we need a United States senator who will unequivocally, clearly, without any hesitation say, let's fight currency manipulation by China, let's fight for fairer trade policies, let's take a stand and fight for the people of Connecticut.
Mark, let's get this back on track now. Your question for Ms. McMahon.
But you're right, Ann, they do make a lovely couple.
Let's get this back on track, shall we?
We got a lot of emails and a lot of voicemails, as I mentioned, from people. So maybe we can bring this back to something that people who have asked us to ask about will hear about. This is an email from a woman who identifies herself as Grandma in New Haven. Ms. McMahon, how can you possibly defend the total and disgusting degradation of women on World Wrestling? You seem to have amassed a fortune in a very sleazy business.
Please.
Well, let me just say that I am incredibly proud of the company that I've helped build from the ground up. A company that over the last 2 to 3 decades has evolved from just a traveling road show to a corporate citizen that it is today, traded on the New York Stock Exchange and assembled WWE and seen around the world. The programming content of WWE, as has the company, has evolved from TV 14 to TV PG as is rated by the networks on which it plays. And I'm very happy and much more contented today with the content that is part of WWE's soap opera. I think there were times when we pushed the envelope. But I'm very proud of the company that today is involved in programs like Smack Down Your Vote, getting young people out to register and to vote, programs with Special Olympics, with the Make-A-Wish Foundation. And also with the Make-A-Wish Foundation, WWE was granted its highest award. And also the tribute to the troops, the entertaining of the men and women who are serving in Afghanistan and Iraq. And that is a company that I am incredibly proud of, a company that employs almost 600 people here in Connecticut. It is a company that will continue to grow and to prosper, and we will move forward to grow and create jobs here and continue to contribute to the economy here in Connecticut. Because the men and women who are here love being in this state, as I do. And our company has remained in this state throughout the years and will continue to grow and add to the economy here.
Mr. Blumenthal.
Throughout my 20-year career, I have fought to protect children from abuse and neglect, from dangers of marketing of sex and violence, whether it's on the internet or other places. And I've made a record of fighting to safeguard children from dangers of addiction, for example, to tobacco. The people of Connecticut have to ask whose side each of these candidates has been on. My opponent has not only marketed sex and violence to children, but she actually paid hundreds of millions of dollars to lobby in Washington against penalties for sex and violence marketing to children. She also paid millions of dollars to help her navigate a steroid investigation by Congress, and she lobbied state legislatures to stop steroid and drug testing requirements on her business. As much as the content is how she has treated the people who have worked for her, she's hired the wrestlers and many others as independent contractors, thereby denying them health insurance and dodging taxes on Medicare, Social Security, and unemployment compensation. That issue is now under investigation by the state. And she continues to refuse to acknowledge,
Please.
to refuse to acknowledge the long-term health consequences of steroid use, despite overwhelming scientific evidence that it is a problem. So I stand on my record, and I will continue that record of fighting for children, being in their corner, whether it's sex offenders on MySpace or Facebook, or prostitution ads on Craigslist, or abuse and neglect in their homes, domestic violence. I will continue to stand strong for the people of Connecticut and try to protect our children.
Mark, your question to Mr. Blumenthal.
She doesn't get a chance to rebut that?
Well, they went back and forth. Go ahead. I mean, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, thank you very much. Mr. Blumenthal is, as usual, mischaracterizes things. Hundreds of millions of dollars, clearly not the case. One of the things that WWE has done over the years is to make sure that its programming is properly rated, and as I said, I'm very happy we've moved from TV 14 to TV PG, which is seen by millions of people in this country on a weekly basis. And Mr. Blumenthal, we do have the opportunity of whether we go to the movie or watch a television set, you can always change the channel or decide not to go to that particular movie. And I think it's insulting to the millions of people who watch WWE every week and are entertained by it to suggest that somehow it is less than quality entertainment. In terms of making sure that WWE does have absolutely first-class health insurance and benefits for over 500 employees that it has, and a complete health and wellness policy for the men and women who do perform as independent contractors. In fact, those independent contractors make a little over $500,000 a year, and they work about 3 days a week, and they are totally covered for any injury in the ring. So that's just wrong. And I guess it's just typical that you need to continue to talk about WWE because clearly you don't want to talk about job creation, talk about the economy, talk about how raising taxes on portions of people here in our state will in fact take away $12.5 billion and send it to Washington for them to spend. I want to keep that money here at home. I don't want to send it to Washington.
All right. Mark, I'm going to have to interrupt. I'm sorry. Mark, your next question for Mr. Blumenthal.
Mr. Blumenthal, you have spoken in opposition to rate hike requests from the healthcare industry recently here in Connecticut, but at the same time, you favor the program signed into law by President Obama earlier this year. How can you logically criticize the insurance industry for wanting to increase premiums when they are forced by law to increase coverages?
And I have consistently, as you know, opposed premium increases by the insurance companies that are completely unjustified. Last year, a more than 30% rate increase request by Anthem, for example, that was cut down after a public hearing where I cross-examined, literally myself, cross-examined the supposed executive responsible for that rate increase. And now I oppose this latest round of rate increases because they are in no way justified by the health care reform. Here's the objective evidence. They've asked for rate increases in the range of 20 to 50%. A nonpartisan authoritative study by the Mailman Group says that the cost increases resulting from this health care reform are less than 2%. Two other health insurers, Oxford and Connecticut, asked for premium increases of less than 1%. We have no oversight, sufficient scrutiny in our state, again and again and again. We have been saddled with premium increases because the public's been given no notice, no right to participate. The rate increases go into effect by default if the insurance commissioner doesn't approve them, or rather disapprove them. And one of the weaknesses in the health care reform effort, which I would correct, I support the health care bill, but I would correct the problems that now exist in state regulation and either require stronger, more effective protection for the public or make the federal government responsible for protecting the public. Let me just say, I can't believe that I just heard Ms. McMahon brag about this wellness policy at WWE. She requires all wrestlers to sign a death clause that absolves WWE of all responsibility if wrestlers are killed in the ring and if the company is at fault. Absolves her company of all responsibility. That wellness policy is not working too well. There have been 7 dead wrestlers since she started campaigning for this office. And I would suggest that some other policy might be advisable.
Mrs. McMahon.
Well, interestingly, Mr. Blumenthal, on the health care reform bill, when you talk about increasing, fighting for premium increases, et cetera, I think that gets to the very heart of the issue, that you don't understand consequences that are imposed by regulation and new laws that are passed. Clearly, if you are adding people to the health care rolls, if you are increasing mandates on companies, if you are requiring that, that doctors aren't going to be paid as much and therefore they're going to be leaving the health care rolls, but if you are adding people to the health care rolls and increasing mandates on health care companies, does it not stand to reason that the premiums would go up? And that's a clear example of not understanding intended consequences on rules and regulations. That's just, it's absolutely what happens when someone who's spent a lifelong career in government goes to Washington to pass more taxes and regulations. They don't understand the impact it's going to have on business. Because there are implications, there are consequences of passing taxes and regulations. When you are looking at what happens when you increase taxes on small businesses by another almost 4%, you're going to take away their incentive to create jobs and to grow. When you look at passing a health care mandate that is going to remove $500 billion of payment to Medicare and is going to hurt our seniors, you have to understand that consequence. And when you pass a health care bill that doesn't address what it started to do, or what it was stated to do, which was bend the cost curve, and it's not doing that. We're already seeing premiums increase in double digits, and it didn't address tort reform, or it didn't address being able to buy insurance across state lines, or allowing small businesses to group together to buy insurance. Those are things that should have been addressed, in the health care bill. But I think we need to understand what the consequences are of passing regulations, and you don't. You don't have that clarity. And relative, to WWE, there is absolutely a program in place to help the men and women in WWE, these performers who are in the ring. And the consequences of death is a very sad thing when that happens. But those were not consequences as a result of ring performance. So, Mr. Blumenthal, I would hope that when you go to Washington, you would understand consequences of regulations that you are going to pass.
If I may respond.
Actually, can you hold it? Because in the interest of time, I want the candidates to look what you have left here. So I need to move on to Paul. Your next question for
I'm aware of the time, and I have 3 minutes, if I may.
Sure.
I want to say that I well understand the health care problem in this country, just as I well understand how people are hurting in this country economically, without jobs, struggling to stay in their homes. What I see in the health care problem is the thousands of people who come to my office after they've been denied health care coverage for medically necessary problems, whether it's cancer treatment or stem cell operations or baby formula. And they come to me because the health care companies, the managed care companies, the health insurers have said to them, you have a pre-existing condition, or the doctor's out of network, or the treatment's experimental. This health care reform bill makes sure that no child is denied health care coverage when she is sick, and that no worker is dropped from health care coverage simply because he gets sick, and no American family goes into bankruptcy because they can't pay their medical bills. And those abusive excuses, like pre-existing conditions, are not expensive for the health care insurance company to stop. And I will fight to stop those kinds of abuses and retain the protections that guarantee that Americans are treated fairly by this health care system.
Paul, your question to Mrs. McMahon, please. Your question to Mrs. McMahon, please. Shh, please.
Legislation has stalled in Congress, which seems to ask a simple thing. It would require organizations airing political ads to disclose their donors and the amounts they paid. So far, Republicans have blocked this legislation. Shouldn't citizens have the right to know who is trying to influence their votes?
Well, it's my understanding relative to this particular bill, excuse me, relative to this particular bill, that there are carve-outs. Like unions don't have to be disclosed if they are putting up an advertisement. And there are other special interest groups that don't have to disclose, and that's my understanding. So therefore, I don't think it is full disclosure. And I don't think that Congress at this point needs to be choosing which group has the right of freedom of speech, as the Supreme Court has determined. So I would certainly, I certainly support the fact that there should not be carve-outs, for those disclosures, and that, we should move forward with the Supreme Court ruling, which is under the First Amendment, that companies or corporations would have the right to put those advertisements up. And that's the way we should move forward in this campaign. I've, funded my campaign myself with money that I've earned. I've not taken any special interest or any PAC money, so my commercials certainly, bear the disclaimer that I've approved the message, and I have paid for those commercials, as I say, with money that I've earned without any special interest money. And I've done that because I don't want to be beholden to special interests when I go to Washington. I don't want to represent anyone but the people of Connecticut. I would like to be the voice for the people of Connecticut. And I think when you have accepted special interest money, it certainly can, at the very least, sometimes taint your objectivity. So I'm very pleased with money that I've earned, that I've been able to fund my campaign.
So just to clarify, you would support full disclosure.
Please.
You would support full disclosure if there are no exceptions. Is that your position?
Well, I believe, I think the Supreme Court ruling, was pretty clear, that it is said that corporations and companies should be able to advertise, on should be able to advertise for candidates.
Mr. Blumenthal.
Yes, I support absolute and full disclosure. Very simply, I support the American public knowing what kinds of contributions are made, where they're going, and how they may result from special interests actually buying power in Washington. One of the problems in Washington is that it isn't listening to us. And people rightfully are angry that Washington isn't listening and isn't acting to respond to our needs. And part of the reason is that the special interests are getting big giveaways and special breaks and tax loopholes, and they are buying them invisibly because of the lack of disclosure. And the Citizens United case by the United States Supreme Court is unleashing a deluge of special interest money, and the American public has a right to know where it's coming from. Now, I want to say about my own situation. People of Connecticut know me, and they know that no contribution to my campaign has ever influenced what I've done, because I've stood up to those special interests. I have taken on the utilities and the pharmaceutical drug companies and the big tobacco companies and the energy interests without hesitation. And I have stood for the people of Connecticut, putting them first, holding accountable companies that put profits before people. And I will continue to do that if I'm lucky enough to be a United States Senator.
Just 1 second.
Go ahead.
I'm just confused, Mr. Blumenthal, as to why you then are taking special interest money to fund your campaign. You first said you wouldn't, then you did, and now even the National Democratic Party is coming in buying lots of commercials for you to air in the marketplace. So I'm just a little bit confused about you're not taking special interest money.
Well, Ms. McMahon.
Please.
The people of Connecticut know me. And they have taken the measure. They've taken the measure of my character over 20 years in the fights that I've fought and won, the results that I've gotten, and the battles that I've taken on for their interests. And they know that I have built my life and spent my life building the future of families in Connecticut, while you have built your fortune putting profits first.
Please. Ladies and gentlemen, please. Please. All right, in the interest of time, Paul, you get the last question, and candidates, you don't have much time left, so Paul, you're going to address Mr. Blumenthal. And you may not get the 3 minutes, Mr. Blumenthal. Bear with us. Go ahead, Paul.
All right, Mr. Blumenthal.
In fact, you're each going to have about a minute each. Make it fast.
The president says global warming is too important an issue to give up on, so he plans to keep pushing his energy agenda, including cap and trade, to reduce carbon emissions. Will you be fighting with him on that issue?
We need a national energy policy, and it has to consist of cutting utility costs. Our electricity bills are way too high. Creating green jobs, which we can do, for example, as we've done in our fuel cell industry, and making out-of-state polluters pay for their contamination of our air and water, and rewarding our state for being relatively clean burning. Cap and trade is dead. It died in the last Congress. Let's be clear, I supported the cap and trade concept in a letter that I wrote advocating that it be changed to make it better for Connecticut. But I oppose a national energy tax, and I believe that we need to move forward with a national energy policy that creates green jobs here, which we can do, for example, as the Fuel Cell Energy Corporation in Torrington has done. I am not in favor of a national energy tax. The attack by my opponent on me is false. It's been called misleading by the Hartford Courant, and I believe that we can do better as a nation to hold polluters accountable and stop the kind of misguided energy project that we almost saw in the middle of Long Island Sound with Broadwater.
Mr. Blumenthal.
My opponent doesn't know whether she would have fought Broadwater.
Mrs.
I am
McMahon.
proud of having fought and won that fight.
This is the final answer. Go ahead.
Mr. Blumenthal, I just want to go back for a minute when you talked about the people of Connecticut know you. They know now that you have a difficult time telling the truth. They know that you had a hard time
Please,
telling the
please,
truth
ladies and
about
gentlemen.
Vietnam.
Shh, please. Ladies
They
and
know-
gentlemen, please.
They know that you did not tell the truth on several occasions, and then after you apologized about Vietnam, then you also did not tell the truth on a couple of other occasions relative to your status on your draft number or the deferment. You then said that you were not going to Calgary for a fundraiser. Well, in point of fact, you did, and then you later admitted that you were going to Calgary for a fundraiser. The invitation clearly showed it was a trial lawyer fundraiser, that you were going there and you would get a certain percentage of the amounts that were raised for that night. So you do have a credibility issue. The people of Connecticut know you, but I think that what they know now is that you have great difficulty in always telling the truth.
30 more
I
seconds.
will.
30 more seconds, Mr. Blumenthal.
I must say, I will not be lectured on straight talk
I'm not lecturing you.
Please.
from a woman who has failed to, anyone who has failed to be straight with the people of Connecticut on
All right, Mr. Blumenthal, I'm going to have
the
to leave
issues
it
of
right
the minimum
there.
wage, Social
In
Security,
the interest of
and
time,
Medicare.
ladies and gentlemen, please, so we can, thank you. All right, closing statements. You each have 2 minutes. Mrs. McMahon, you are first.
Well, once again, thank all of you for participating in our debate tonight, those of you who are here and those of you who are watching at home. I got into this race because our economy is in shambles. People are out of work. Families are hurting. Nest eggs are devastated. And there aren't enough people in Washington that know how to create jobs. And I want to make sure that the American dream is here for my grandchildren and for more generations to come. I'm a mother, I'm a grandmother, I'm a wife. I've struggled building a career while raising a family, and neither job was easy. I've known lean times, and I've known prosperity. I've been the CEO in a tough business, and I've made tough decisions. The choice in this election on November 2nd are absolutely clear. Mr. Blumenthal He's been a lifelong politician and in government all of his life. I'm a businesswoman that's created over 500 jobs here in our state. He wants to grow government. I want to grow the economy, and they both can't grow at the same time. He wants to raise taxes. I want to keep taxes low and keep the money in the hands of our families in Connecticut and businesses that do create jobs. We have to change the direction our government is taking our country. We absolutely must incentivize small businesses so that jobs will grow in the private sector. You know, I have spent the past year traveling around our state, talking to many of you almost on a daily basis. And I have learned that there are many of you who are hurting. And as a senator, I want that young mother with 2 children who was widowed as a result of the Afghanistan war and fighting for her benefits. I want the veteran fighting red tape. And I want the teacher struggling for innovation to know that they have a champion, and for our seniors to know that they will be protected. This is the greatest country on earth. The opportunity here abounds. We just have to write her course, and we can.
Thank you very much, Mrs. McMahon. Mr. Blumenthal, 2 minutes, please. Please, please. Ladies and gentlemen, please. Mr. Blumenthal, 2 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you again to everyone who has participated tonight. This election, like all elections, is about the future, and it offers a clear choice. My opponent has said that she is different, and she is different from me. I am proud of having devoted my life to helping people through public service. I'm proud of having helped Kathy Platt when her business at Alderman Motors was about to be shut down by General Motors, and we saved those jobs. I'm proud to have stood with Billy Clark when his jobs and hundreds of other jobs at Pratt & Whitney were going to be shipped abroad or ended illegally, and we stood side by side. And I'm proud of having stood with Laura Austin when her insurer was going to stop providing the baby formula that she needed. I am proud of standing strong and helping people, not putting profits before people. And I think the question for the people of Connecticut will be, if my opponent has treated the people who work for her the way she has, how will she treat the people who vote for her? I am proud.
Please.
I am proud of having fought for the people of Connecticut. And you don't need to simply listen to me. Look at my record of action. If I were United States Senator, I would have opposed the bailout because it did too much for Wall Street, not enough for those small businesses that really need help. I would oppose the loopholes in our taxation laws that encourages jobs to go overseas. I would stand for a middle-class tax cut now in fairness and also because it's the right thing for our economy. Again and again and again, I have stood for the people of Connecticut. They can count on me, you can count on me, to be in your corner and to fight for you.
Mr. Blumenthal, thank you very much. Mrs. McMahon, thank you very much. All right, in the interest of time, on behalf of the League of Women Voters, to our panelists, to our candidates, I'm Ann Nyberg. Thank you for letting us be here with you tonight, and thank you for making this a most interesting night. Good night.